Hey doc, what should I eat? I've been diagnosed with prediabetes. Just tell me what I should eat. You know, for folks who've been diagnosed with prediabetes, this is the most common question that I get asked as a physician. Just, doc, tell me what I should eat. And today we're going to be going back to some of the diabetes basics and really focusing in on 4 questions about carbohydrates that I think you will find very useful. Hey, I'm Dr. Topher Fox, endocrinologist in Superior, Colorado, and today we are talking about carbohydrates, trying to condense this talk down into 4 questions that I think will be really useful to you to help get around a lot of the myths and misinformation that is out there about carbohydrates. So let's dive right in. Question number 1, what exactly is a carbohydrate? So carbohydrates are starches and sugars. And if we start with sugars, we know sugars come in a couple forms. They come in what are called monosaccharides, individual sugar molecules like glucose or fructose or galactose. And a lot of sugars are actually combined into these larger sugars, in particular for us, what are called disaccharides. So think of a Lego block being an individual sugar. Disaccharide would just be 2 Lego blocks that are stuck together. Common ones that you will run across are sucrose or table sugar, which is 1 glucose and 1 fructose stuck together. You might run across lactose or milk sugar, which is a glucose stuck together with a galactose. These would probably be the 2 most common that we run into. So disaccharides. And disaccharides, when we eat them, are broken down before they're absorbed. They're broken down by enzymes into the individual sugars. So we have sugars and we have starches. A starch is really just a complex, typically plant form of glucose molecules that have been aggregated together. So you could think of a stack of Lego blocks that's like 1,000 Lego blocks high, stacked high with glucose. And what we know is that these glucose molecules, they just take a little bit longer to absorb. It's almost like they have to be plucked off one by one using a special process. So what is a carb? A carb is either going to be a starch or a sugar. And where do carbohydrates show up in our diet? Question number 2, where do they show up? Well, obviously we all know about fruit. They show up in fruit, they show up in vegetables, they show up in whole grains, they show up in dairy. These would be the most common, really natural sources that we have for carbohydrates coming into our diet. But in the American diet, there is or are some other sneaky ways that these get in there, and it's primarily through added sugars and highly processed foods. This will be important. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So question number 3, what actually happens to a carbohydrate when you eat it? What can carbohydrates do? So again, we talked about disaccharides being broken down into monosaccharides, or starch being slowly broken down into glucose molecules. These enter the bloodstream, and a sugar in the bloodstream can do one of 3 things. And so specifically glucose, the main sugar, can be used by any cell in your body to produce energy. It's the main energy producing source that comes from sugar. It's absolutely critical that glucose be there in your bloodstream. In fact, if you eat 0 glucose, your body will make it from other stuff. So number 1, you can use it for fuel. Number 2 is that glucose can be stored for later use, in particular in this form called glycogen. It's kind of like starch, but a human form. So these glucose molecules can get stacked together into large blocks of glucose molecules, thousands of glucose molecules that can be stored in the liver. So about 100 grams of glucose can be stored in the liver. Just for contrast, you have about 5 grams of glucose in your bloodstream at any one point if you have normal glucose regulation. So about 100 grams can go into the liver, and maybe 500 or 600 grams can go into glycogen in your muscle. Again, that'll be important in just a minute. So we're going to come back to that one. So that was fate number 2. So we can use glucose for fuel, we can store it as glycogen, and then the remainder will go to the liver, and it can be converted into fat or stored as fat, which is an efficient way for us to store extra calories. Now, interestingly, molecules like fructose actually go preferentially to the liver to be either metabolized back into glucose or to get turned into fat, but they've got to go through the liver to start with. So again, 3 fates for glucose. And all of this comes down to this final question, question number 4. And this is where all the misunderstanding comes from. Hey, doc, I've been diagnosed with prediabetes. Can I eat these things? Can I eat carbs? And we all know that there are dietary styles, so the keto style or the paleo style, that emphasize a very low carbohydrate approach. And what I'll tell you is that there is, like I said, this is misunderstood. There's a lot of misunderstanding, which is here. But the punchline is this: you can eat carbs if you want to, with some caveats. And so the basic idea is this. So think about 2 things. Number 1 is that if you're going to eat carbohydrates, we want high quality carbohydrates. So think vegetables, fruits, whole grains. Yes, I said fruits and I said whole grains. The science would tell us these can be part of a healthy diet. We want carbohydrates that are not processed. So we want to get rid of added sugars. We want to get rid of refined grains. We want to eat foods close to their natural state with no added sugars and little refinement. So we want to eat high quality carbs. But here's the caveat. We also want to eat within something that we will call the carbohydrate tolerance. And this is where the misunderstanding comes from. We all have a carbohydrate tolerance, meaning we can ingest or eat a certain amount of carbohydrates without allowing our blood sugar to spike up high. Now, this carbohydrate tolerance is different for every person. If you've been diagnosed with prediabetes, there's evidence that you have been eating above your carbohydrate tolerance because that A1C or that sugar was high, telling you that you at some points have spiked your blood sugar up too high. Now, for another talk, there are some specific tools, this really neat thing called continuous glucose monitoring, which you can use to really help dial in how food is affecting your blood sugar minute to minute and hour to hour and day to day. That'll be for another talk. But you have to eat below your carbohydrate tolerance. And how do we know what this is, or what could we do to improve carbohydrate tolerance? So for most people, if you've been diagnosed with prediabetes, it's likely that your carbohydrate tolerance will allow you to eat somewhere, let's say between 50 and 100 grams of healthy carbohydrates per day. So think 15 to 30 grams per meal of carbohydrates. And we want to emphasize those high quality carbohydrates again. And over time, you can improve your carbohydrate tolerance, specifically by increasing muscle quality, so with regular exercise. And then in the postmenopausal demographic, we know that a lot of folks suffer from low muscle mass. And so by working on strength training and eating adequate protein to be able to increase muscle mass can help to improve your carbohydrate tolerance, the number of carbohydrates you can eat without spiking your blood sugar high. So exercise basically takes glycogen out of the muscle and you've got to put it back there. So when you eat glucose, it's got a place to go that doesn't involve going to your liver and going into fat. If you've got more muscle, you can put more of it there. Now, little ninja trick for you is that if you know you're going to eat something which will spike your blood sugar, there are a couple tricks that you can do to help minimize that spike. Trick number 1 is to eat protein and fiber first. Save the carbohydrates for the end of the meal. Focus on the protein, non-starchy vegetables, other fiber sources at the beginning of the meal. It slows down the carbohydrates coming in. It minimizes that spike. The second thing is that acid does the same thing. So a little bit of lemon juice added to food or some vinegar can do wonders to help keep that spike from occurring. Or hey, you can just go for a walk after you eat that meal. Will also help limit that spike. So I hope this is helpful. Quick rundown, 4 questions about carbohydrates. Really important that you start to understand carbohydrate tolerance. This will loosen up or help you to understand what you can eat, particularly if you don't want to join one of the nutrition camps that are out there, but you just want to eat healthy food that tastes good. So hey, as I wrap up, if you are postmenopausal and have prediabetes and you like training like this, we have a membership program that is really designed just for you. Training like this that comes out on a regular basis to help you build a sustainable eating plan that will help you prevent diabetes and ideally reverse prediabetes, along with training to help you follow through on your good intention to make healthy choices when we all know that that's hard to do consistently because of the world we live in, because of the way that our brains work. It's hard to follow through on those good intentions. So you can learn more at www.topherfox.com/membership. You can also link to that site, easy to remember, reversingprediabetes.com. And you can try your first month for just $1, so it's really no risk to you. So check it out. Leave your comments down below, questions down below. I wish you peace. Take care.